The Viking Age, Chapter 8. We needed the wind to speed us on our way. Having asked Njord to give us strong winds and calm seas, the sailors began to row with all their might into the ocean in a northerly direction. Norway. North. North. Depending on the winds, our journey could be anywhere from 10 to 20 days before we were finished with it in order to complete it. On board the ship, there was one sailor who had already journeyed to Iceland several times before. His knowledge of the ocean waters was invaluable or very useful, and he clearly ruled the roost. As we traveled, other sailors watched the ocean current, observed the behavior of the seabirds and the sea animals, and looked to the stars and the position of the sun for direction. All of this enabled them to steer an accurate course across the ocean. As we lost sight of the land, the sailors stopped rowing, just as Tully had said they would. They raised the mainsail. I noticed that they were using a weather vane to show the wind's direction. As the day progressed, the wind picked up. And we started moving more swiftly across the ocean. Tully and I were not just passengers. We had work to do on board the ship. We were responsible for adding to the food supplies and, well, as helping to cook. So the sun began to set on our first day aboard the ship. Tully and I, we fished. And we talked about home. We were lucky. In a short time, we caught several large white fish. So we gutted and deboned them and cut them up into pieces, getting them ready to be placed in a large cooking pot. fire for cooking was started in a large cauldron. The cauldron was suspended from an iron tripod. One, two, three. A smaller pot for cooking was hung over the fire. We had a plentiful supply of salted and smoked meat on board. It was stored in several large dry barrels. We were able to make bread each day as well, and we had chickens too. Fresh water was kept in special barrels with a cover to keep out salt water. One day led to the next to the next. Tolly and I quickly established a routine on board the ship. We would begin the day by fishing. Then we would wash and help prepare breakfast for the crew and the others on board the ship. Then, after breakfast, we would help clean the deck and give out supplies of drinking water. We would tend to the fire in the cauldron, and then in the late afternoon came, we would once again cast our fishing line into the ocean. One evening when we were fishing, Tolly told me an interesting story about the place that we would soon be our new home. Do you know Bjorn? You know Bjorn, who was the first successful Viking to settle in Iceland? Tolly asked. I told Tolly that I could not remember. Tolly shook his head and winked at me and then continued. It was of the valiant Ingolfur Amarson, also known as Ingolf. Ingolf. I have a picture of Ingolf. There it is. Ingolfur Amarson. Others had tried before, but had failed. He was determined to succeed. Ingolf did not know where the best place to settle was, so he asked the gods to help him. And he cast some wooden posts into the ocean and waited for them to float to the land and wash ashore. When they did, he began to build the settlement that we now call Reykjavik. Here's the land. Here's the city, Reykjavik. Reykjavik. Let's see if we could spell it. R-E-Y-K-J-A-V. Reykjavik. So here's the sign for Reykjavik. City R, Reykjavik. On that very spot, so Tolly, he sure loved to talk. And he often had stories about our brave warriors and explorers. But much to Tolly's disappointment, we did not have an encounter with any sea monsters. On our voyage. One day, however, a large fish flew right up out of the water while we were fishing, and it scared us half to death. The wind was with us all the way, and after 2 days of sailing north, we shifted and started sailing west. North, west, west. Apart from 2 nights of heavy rain, our journey was easy and uneventful. We completed our voyage in good time, catching our first sight of the land about midday on the 14th day. We sailed closer to Reykjavik, and we could see mountains rising up to the clouds. And some had snow coating the tops. As well as large areas of beautiful green pasture land. The houses had green grass growing right on the roofs, just as if the fields were growing on top of them. There was not an impressive wharf like the one back in our hometown. Instead, this was a small, muddy harbor area. A large group of people stood in the mud waiting for our ship to arrive. As we approached, I could tell that many of them were simply curious bystanders. All the people in Iceland, they lived on farms in the countryside. Remember that sailor who had been to Iceland before? He told us that it was always exciting for the Icelanders when a ship from Norway arrived. People gathered at the shore to see what was happening, get news from Norway, and see whether there were goods to be traded. Tully and I disembarked the ship and walked toward the crowds of people. Though we didn't know anyone, the people of this new land, they kind of looked strangely familiar. They looked and talked just like the people back home. We walked slowly. We were mingling within the crowd and taking in all the new sights and the new sounds. Twice we had to explain to a small boy that we were not interested in buying a falcon that he appeared to be selling. Although Tully, he did stop for a moment to consider whether or not it would be advantageous for him to own a bird of prey. We had never met our uncles Valley and Toonie, as they had left our homeland before we were born. In many ways, they would be our newly adopted fathers. Suddenly, a man, what happened? Suddenly, a man, the size of a bear with long, untrimmed beard, came charging toward us. And he grabbed a hold of me and then clapped hard on Tully's back. Nephews, welcome to Iceland. Not much, I know, but you will get to like it. I would like you to know, I would know you anywhere. I am your uncle, Toonie, Valley, Uncle V, he exclaimed. And then he laughed out loud. Now, how was your journey? How are your parents? Your cousins? Cannot wait. They're so anxious to meet you. I expect you are hungry. Uncle Billy, he continued to talk and ask questions all at the same time. He did not seem to need any answers to the questions, and so Tolly and I simply nodded or agreed with almost everything that he said as we followed him through the streets of our new town. Our legs felt very shaky as we walked through the muddy streets. Having been on the sea for so many days, we still had our sea legs and were not yet used to firm ground. It was a strange feeling. And a number of occasions, I thought I was going to fall flat on my face in the mud. After several minutes of walking through the same kind of narrow, muddy streets as the ones that we had left behind, I began to hear some familiar sounds. We were approaching Uncle Val's forge. He was a blacksmith, just like my father, and I will be working as an apprentice with him and his son, Ivor. Whereas Tolly would be farming with Uncle Toonie and his family. We approached my uncle's house, and I could see immediately it was quite different from our houses at home. It was one of the long houses that had grass growing on the roof. I wonder if they graze their cows up there, Tolly whispered with a grin on his face. Those grass homes keep us nice and warm, Uncle Toonie explained as he noticed our reaction to the house. Come on inside. There's many people wanting to meet you. As we entered my uncle's home, I could see immediately, although the outside was different, the inside was not. Inside contained one long, dimly lit central hall. There was also a large hearth around which many people were sitting. Once inside, I caught the smell of something really good. The aroma seemed to be coming from a large iron pot suspended above the hearth. I hoped it was not fish. Immediately, a lady, a little bit older than my mother, ran toward us. Welcome to your new home. I am your Aunt Torrid. She smiled and she turned to call to the rest of the family. Hey, Uncle Torn, come and meet your nephews. Hey, Astrid, Hilda, Rolf, Ivar, Sigrid, come and meet your cousins. Within seconds, we were surrounded. Until now, unknown family members. Uncle Toonie, he stepped over here. It's Uncle Toonie. He stepped forward and he greeted us. I was surprised at how much he looked like my father. And he was quiet, like him too. Then a number of girls and boys of various ages stepped forward to say hello. Finally, an older lady was introduced to us as Grandmother Gudrun. She beckoned us toward the hearth. As we sat together on the floor, she began to serve us the evening meal. It was a beef stew, and it tasted really good. Tolly and I, we ate eagerly. Once we had eaten, Aunt Torrid led us toward 2 raised beds in the very back of the longhouse. The beds were covered in animal furs. You should rest, she said softly. You have had a long journey, and tomorrow your new life with us will begin. Then she smiled and walked away. Here's all those cousins. Tolly responded by throwing himself down upon his new bed and immediately fell asleep. I sat in the darkness for a long time and thought about my childhood days with my family, my journey to my new home, and all of the things that might be ahead. I knew that when I awoke the next day, I no longer would be a child.